Hi, I'm FTG, and welcome to another Deck Tech Breakdown. And before we get into things, I moved. There's so much room for activities. It's wild. And I'm also trying to figure out like lighting and things like that. It's interesting. Anyways, moving on to what we're talking about today, which is Orca Siege Demon. It's a 7 CMC commander, which I was like, I don't know if I would want to build a commander around this because that's pretty expensive. But someone commented, Ruben Saavedra, and sorry if I botched your last name, asked me to do a breakdown for this, so I thought I'd give it a go. So let's take a look at what this commander does. They have Trample, and whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Orca Siege Demon. So something to keep in mind, this says another creature dies, not your opponent's, not yours. So any old person's creature dying. But if you make people sacrifice stuff or you kill other people's things, that's going to result in stonks for this commander. So the other paragraph for this too is when it dies, deal damage equal to its power divided as you choose among any number of targets. So any number of targets, but also any target comes in at 5 attack power and toughness. So that means you can initially, just by casting it and sacrificing it if it dies, hit people in the face for either 5 damage to one target or divide it up among whoever made you really sad that game. But I think that commander is going to be interesting just because it might even get people to not want to board wipe in some situations. Like, oh, if I board wipe, are they going to hit me for 5 damage because of that, So if you have those kind of like blood artisty effects out, like could be a good deterrent from having your stuff getting removed. So looking at like what this commander wants to do, you want to fling, damage or ping people. So essentially like non-combat damage focus. And then you want to have sacrifice outlets. So yeah, your commander can throw damage at people, but you need to kill it, right? Because if people can't kill it or you can't kill it, it's going to be hard to fling that damage. So sack outlets help a lot with that. And I talk a lot about how I like free sack outlets because I like tapping my mana and doing things, but it's hard to do that if you have to leave mana up, like 2 mana or something, just to sacrifice a creature to do something, I don't know, like save it from getting exiled. So I prefer like Viserys here, Woe Strider, Phyrexian Ghoul, Phyrexian Tower. I think overall, like, you know, the the sacrifice outlet is going to be super important for what your commander wants to do, especially just to like protect it. So like if someone's trying to swords it, you can sacrifice it in response and still hit someone. And maybe if you have a few counters on it, it will feel less like you kind of wasted your time with this commander if you can sacrifice it before someone exiles it. So sacrifice outlets are going to be key for just protecting your strategy and making your strategy happen. So with sacrifice outlets, we also want sack fodder because we can try to make our opponent sacrifice things, but I think you're going to have an easier time if you have a consistent way of, killing things and, building up like your own board state to just, I don't know, make your commander chunky. So I like 2 different types of like tokens here that I think will synergize really well. One is going to be devil tokens because when you sacrifice one, its death trigger lets you throw 1 damage at any target. So if you're just making a lot of devil tokens and you're, sacrificing stuff anyways and trying to make your commander go bigger, well, you can hit people for damage or other creatures for damage while you're working on that. And same with like decayed tokens. I think decayed tokens are going to be super helpful because sometimes like if you just make a regular token and you don't have your sack outlet ready, or someone destroyed your sack outlet and you need to be able to still have things die, sometimes people won't block like your 2/2 zombie because they would rather just have it deal 2 damage to them rather than letting something like get bigger or give you value from that. So I think decayed zombie tokens are going to be helpful for those kind of situations. So I think Jadar is a super helpful, creature just because it's going to be making zombies on your instep. Issa Glorious Resurrector is going to be super cool for this because it's going to have graveyard hate with it for 1. But 2, then you're going to be from your non-token creatures that your opponents have that maybe you're forcing them to sacrifice or that got killed, you can make a decayed copy of that. And so if they have death triggers on those creatures, you can just attack and then obviously they die and you get those benefits. So I think that overall is going to be some really interesting synergy. And then for non-tokens, I like stuff like Clattering Augur, Disc Legion Zealot, and Callous Blood Mage because they are not only just, giving you card draw when they enter the battlefield, but then they're a body that you can just sacrifice. I think Callous Blood Mage out of all of these options are going to be my favorite go-to card because it's also graveyard hate. It creates a token and then it can let you draw. You can only choose one of those options, but just the versatility of what you get from that card on its ETB is really huge. The other thing for this too, I think there's two really key pieces that you have to pull off for just functionality wise with this deck. The first one is going to be ramp. So with ramp, I think treasures are going to be probably the easiest way to pull off, what you want to do. And I think that's going to have the most repeated value of what you can get. What I mean by that is you have creatures that can make treasures on ETB effects, and then you can have creatures that, make treasure when they attack. So on the ETB effect ones, you have Skullfort Merchant, which is also, you do have to pay 2 mana to do it, but it can let you sacrifice an artifact to draw a card or another creature to draw a card. So that's just card advantage and another sack outlet, while also it makes you treasure on its ETB. So that's a pretty cool card. I also like Ruthless Technomancer because you can do this weird loop with Dockside where you sacrifice Dockside, goes to the graveyard, you bring it back. Of course, it depends on how many artifacts your opponents have and stuff, but you can get a lot of value just from essentially looping, Dockside and Technomancer and make all your opponents sad because you're making a bajillion treasures. And then Professional Facebreaker, I think, is an incredible card because again, it lets you make, treasures, and it's got menace. So a lot of times you can actually make those treasures during combat because it has to hit a player, but you can also sacrifice a treasure token, exile the top card off your library. So it gives you built-in card advantage there too. So it's a really cool card. But yeah, there's just a lot of really interesting treasure effects in Rakdos in general. So I think you're just going to be able to do tons of cool things. I think reanimation is going to be super key for essentially letting your commander hit the battlefield multiple times, because I don't think you want to cast this commander from the command zone if you can help it. I think you're going to want to put it into the graveyard every time you sacrifice it, and then fling that damage at your opponents and let it grow chunky again, throw it at your opponents, and just kind of go through that loop if possible. And then basically just only cast it from the command zone if someone exiles your graveyard or directly exiles your commander. And that's kind of just my thought on that. But my favorite reanimation cards are Animate Dead, Living Death. I like Feign Death, so, it's not reanimating it, but it's kind of saving it. So if someone tries to, destroy your commander, then you can just cast Feign Death and it comes back to the battlefield. So stuff like that. I also like Olivia Crimson Bride. So moving on, I think there's some supporting ideas for this where I think you can be really mean if you want to, as far as edict effects. So I don't really like playing Flush Bag or Grave Pact effects because I think it draws a lot of ire from the table and attention. Not necessarily in a way that people are oh, you're just being mean, but kind of how stacks or hate bear effects have an influence on the game where you just draw a lot of negative attention because people don't like sacrificing their creatures. People like playing the game and stuff. So I personally don't add a ton of flush bag effects if I can help it. I keep a few flush bag effects in my Linda deck because she wants to see creatures dying, and I'm just doing it more for making sure I'm getting counters on my commander than necessarily trying to focus on using them for their removal effects. So I think it could be helpful to have a few, maybe Henrika in here, or just the alternative of you can force people to sack stuff if you want, but she also gets you card draw and whatnot. So I think those kind of effects are going to be pretty helpful. And then another supporting idea, it's pretty much what you're already doing, but you're gaining life, is just some sort of Drain Aristocrats sub theme, because there's a lot of stuff in black obviously that lets you do that, like Meat Hook, Fashion of Remembrance, and Blood Artist. So I think those are going to just be other ways that you can win the game, especially Grey Merchant Apostle, just dropping that and draining everyone out. So This deck I can see just with those effects alone do quite a bit of damage to the table and potentially let you win without even maybe casting your commander a lot just because you're, draining everyone out. So that's kind of my overall review of the commander. I am really curious if any of you had a chance to try it out yet. I know it's a brand new card, so I'm not surprised if not a lot of decks are out in the wild with this commander. But just let me know like what you would like to add as well to this if you were gonna build it, and if you have any commanders that you'd like me to look at and do a deck breakdown for. Yeah, I don't know. But anyways, thank you so much for hanging out and have a good one. Bye.